On a night when the Las Vegas Strip shimmered with neon and champagne laughter, a 19-year-old girl sat behind a folding table trying to sell her paintings to stay alive. While tourists drifted between casinos chasing jackpots and performers stepped out of luxury hotels to applause, she was fighting something far less glamorous than bad luck. She was fighting cancer. The chemo bills were stacking higher than the hotel towers behind her, and every brushstroke she had ever painted suddenly carried a price tag that had nothing to do with art and everything to do with survival. Pause for a second and picture the contrast. On one side, flashing lights, velvet ropes, and the illusion that money never runs out. On the other, a teenager with trembling hands, a handwritten sign, and a body weakened by treatment she couldn't afford. Isn't it strange how the loudest places in the world can still feel isolating? She wasn't there for attention. She wasn't chasing fame. She was there because when life corners you, you either shrink or you create, and she chose to create. But here's where the tension tightens. She didn't know if anyone would stop. She didn't know if strangers rushing toward slot machines would slow down long enough to notice the quiet emotion in her landscapes. And beneath that uncertainty lived a deeper fear. What if her talent wasn't enough? What if hope itself had a price she couldn't pay? That night, though, something shifted. Not with fireworks, not with spectacle, just a pause. A moment when someone unexpected stopped walking, a glance that lingered longer than politeness requires. You've felt that kind of moment before, haven't you? When life seems ordinary, even heavy, and then something subtle interrupts the pattern. The question is never just who stopped, it's why. And what happens when the right person crosses your path at the exact moment you're about to give up? Because sometimes transformation doesn't announce itself. It approaches quietly, disguised as coincidence. And on that glowing stretch of pavement between desperation and possibility, a surprise was already unfolding. One that would challenge everything she believed about struggle, about generosity, and about how quickly a life can change when someone decides not to keep walking. The truth is, she had not always been the girl behind a folding table asking strangers to believe in her talent. Just months earlier, she was a teenager planning her future the way most young artists do. Sketchbook filled with ideas, imagining gallery walls and art school applications. Painting had never been about money for her. It was the way she made sense of silence, the way she translated feelings she couldn't explain out loud. When other people scrolled or socialized, she mixed colors until they matched the mood in her chest. That was her normal. Then came the diagnosis, leukemia, a word that doesn't just enter a room, it changes the temperature of it. One appointment turned into a series of consultations, and suddenly conversations at the dinner table shifted from college dreams to treatment plans. Have you ever noticed how quickly life can redraw your priorities? One minute you are choosing between electives, the next you are calculating survival rates. The doctors spoke carefully, optimistically even, but optimism has a cost when treatment isn't cheap. Her parents were the kind of people who believed hard work could fix most problems. Her father took every construction shift he could find. Her mother cleaned hotel rooms until her back ached. They weren't careless, they weren't irresponsible, they were simply ordinary people facing an extraordinary bill. And that's what makes this ache so familiar. So many families live one crisis away from financial collapse, hoping dedication will be enough to outrun reality. At first, they tried to shield her from the numbers. They whispered late at night about loans and overtime, about what could be sold and what could be postponed. But she heard them. She saw the tension in her father's shoulders and the way her mother's smile tightened. Illness doesn't just weaken the body, it exposes the fragile math of a household budget. And in that exposure, something shifted inside her. She didn't want to be the reason her family drowned in debt. Painting had always been her sanctuary. Now it became her strategy. She looked at her canvases not as hobbies, but as possibilities. If strangers could spend money on souvenirs and show tickets, maybe someone would spend it on a story captured in oil and color. It wasn't pride that pushed her to the strip, it was responsibility. Selling her art wasn't glamorous, it was humbling. It meant placing a price on pieces that once felt priceless. But when the alternative is watching your parents break under pressure, what wouldn't you try? So she chose the folding table, the handwritten sign, the long hours under desert heat and flickering neon. Not because she believed it would be easy, but because it was the last option she could control. And sometimes, when everything feels uncertain, taking even one courageous step toward hope feels better than standing still in fear. The first day, she told herself it was just about exposure. People needed time to notice her. The second day, she adjusted the angle of her paintings, believing presentation might change everything. By the third, she began studying faces as they passed, searching for a flicker of connection. 5 days in, the rhythm had become painfully predictable. Footsteps slowed, eyes scanned the canvases, someone offered a soft smile and a gentle, "You're very talented." Then they walked away. Encouragement is kind, but it doesn't pay for chemotherapy, and every polite nod felt like a tiny crack forming beneath her confidence. You learn a lot about yourself in moments like that. You learn how hope stretches, how it bends without breaking, and how rejection rarely arrives loudly. It comes quietly, disguised as indifference. Tourists drifted by with shopping bags and cocktails, absorbed in celebration. They weren't cruel, they were simply elsewhere in their lives. But when you're fighting for time, watching others spend money on entertainment can feel like standing outside a window you can't afford to enter.
Her body wasn't cooperating either. The treatment left her nauseated, lightheaded, and exhausted in ways that sleep couldn't fix. Sitting upright for hours became its own test of endurance. Some afternoons her vision blurred and she had to steady herself before speaking. Still, she smiled. Still, she thanked each passerby. There is a particular bravery in maintaining dignity when you feel fragile. Have you ever tried to appear strong while your strength is quietly draining away? Each day that ended without meaningful sales tightened the pressure. The medical bills were not pausing just because strangers hesitated. At home, the calendar pages seemed louder, flipping closer to the next appointment. She started calculating silently. How many paintings would it take to cover a single session? How many days did she realistically have to make this work? When numbers replace dreams in your thoughts, something inside you shifts. By the fifth evening, doubt began whispering more aggressively. What if this was naive? What if talent wasn't enough in a city built on spectacle? She watched performers' names glow high above the strip, while her small handwritten sign barely caught attention. The contrast felt almost cruel. She wondered whether she should pack everything up and spare herself another day of polite rejection. No one would blame her. Most people would understand. And yet, quitting carried its own cost. If she stopped, what then? Return home and admit that effort hadn't been enough? Watch her parents scramble harder because she ran out of courage? That question lingered heavier than the fatigue in her bones. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't against illness or circumstance, but against the voice telling you to retreat. So she stayed seated a little longer, even as the sun dipped lower, suspended in that fragile space between surrender and stubborn hope. Just as she began to gather the edges of her resolve, the hotel doors opened and a familiar figure stepped into the evening air. He moved with the relaxed confidence of someone accustomed to applause, jacket draped perfectly, posture effortless. People nearby noticed immediately. Conversations softened, heads turned. Fame has a gravity to it. It pulls attention without asking. And for a moment, the current of the strip shifted toward him. She noticed too, but not because she expected anything. She had watched celebrities pass before, surrounded by handlers and schedules, their focus fixed ahead. They existed in a different orbit. Yet this time something subtle interrupted that pattern. Mid-stride he slowed, not dramatically, not theatrically, just enough to suggest curiosity rather than obligation. His gaze drifted across the line of small canvases resting on her table. Have you ever felt a moment stretch as if time is deciding what it wants to become? That was the space she found herself in. She told herself not to assume anything. Famous people glance at many things. Glances don't change lives. And still, he didn't keep walking. He adjusted his direction slightly, angling toward the paintings instead of the waiting car. Each step was unhurried. That pace mattered. It wasn't the quick nod of polite acknowledgement. It was the pace of someone willing to look. And when someone with influence chooses to look, the atmosphere changes. Others began to linger, curious not only about the artwork, but about his interest in it. Attention multiplies quickly in places like that. A small cluster formed at a respectful distance, drawn by recognition and possibility. Inside her, emotions collided. Fatigue, doubt, and a flicker of disbelief rose together. Why would someone like him stop here? What could he possibly see in these modest pieces that hundreds of others had missed? She felt the instinct to shrink, to protect herself from disappointment. Yet another part of her straightened, almost involuntarily. This was the same girl who had decided to fight for her future with paint and courage. If this was an interruption, she would meet it standing. He paused directly in front of the table now, hands loosely clasped, studying the details with quiet concentration. The crowd's murmurs softened, as if the moment demanded respect. Authority has a way of amplifying ordinary spaces, and suddenly her small display felt significant. Still, he said nothing at first. That silence built tension more powerfully than any dramatic gesture could. In that silence lived possibility. And here is the deeper question. How often do opportunities announce themselves gently rather than loudly? Sometimes the turning point in your story doesn't begin with a grand declaration. It begins with someone choosing not to walk past you. She didn't know yet what his interest meant. All she knew was that the pattern had broken. After days of being overlooked, someone influential had stopped, and that single pause carried more potential than all the encouragement she had received before. When he finally spoke, it wasn't with spectacle, but with curiosity. He asked her about the colors, about the way she captured light, about how long she had been painting. Notice the order of that. He didn't begin with sympathy, he began with respect. There is a profound difference between being pitied and being taken seriously. As she answered, her voice steadied. For the first time that week, someone wasn't looking past her illness or her sign. He was looking at her work. He studied one canvas longer than the others, tracing the horizon line with his eyes, as if measuring the emotion inside it. Then he asked the question that shifts identity. Which one matters most to you? Not the cheapest, not the easiest to sell, the one that mattered. That subtle distinction reframed everything. She wasn't just a patient raising money. She was an artist being consulted.
When he chose that painting and agreed to buy it, relief moved through her like warmth. One sale meant another treatment closer to covered. But what happened next altered the scale entirely. Instead of reaching for the exact amount, he pulled out more, far more. He glanced across the table and calmly said he would take them all, every single piece. Imagine the psychological shift in that moment. Days of scraping for small bills, and suddenly someone was assigning serious value to what others overlooked. He wasn't negotiating, he wasn't hesitating, he was investing. And as he counted the money into her trembling hands, he reframed the narrative in a way she would never forget. Art, he explained gently, is worth what someone believes it is worth. In that sentence, he restored not just her finances, but her dignity. Yet even that wasn't the true surprise. As the small crowd watched in admiration, he leaned closer and lowered his voice. Buying the paintings was only the beginning. He asked about her treatment, about the doctors she was seeing, about the full cost she was facing. When she told him the number, she braced for discomfort. Instead, she saw resolve. Here is where generosity becomes protection. He told her that no young person should have to fight illness and bills at the same time.
He asked for her family's contact information, promising to connect them with people who could ensure she received the best care available. Not a temporary fix, not a symbolic gesture, a solution. Do you see the escalation? Interest became respect, respect became purchase, purchase became advocacy, and advocacy became intervention. This is moral elevation in action. When someone with influence chooses responsibility over indifference, the ripple extends far beyond money. She felt something deeper than gratitude. She felt seen, defended, lifted. The unexpected surprise was not simply that he paid generously, it was that he assumed ownership of the problem. In a city built on transactions, he offered commitment, and in that commitment, her story pivoted from survival to possibility. The next morning, the phone rang, and with it came a shift that no one in the Martinez household could have predicted. Her mother picked up, hesitating as she heard the voice on the other end, calm yet purposeful, explaining that every single cost of her daughter's treatment had been arranged. Chemotherapy, follow-up care, medications, everything. Can you imagine the weight lifting all at once? The quiet disbelief settling into a mix of relief and awe? It wasn't just money, it was freedom, a reprieve from nights spent calculating what could be postponed and what couldn't. Her father dropped the rag he had been using to wipe down the kitchen counters, leaning into the table as the words sank in. Their daughter's health, once threatened not only by illness but by the impossibility of payment, was suddenly protected by someone who had chosen to act. How often does life hand us moments like this, where unseen forces conspire to rewrite a story? It wasn't magic, it was intention, care, and a recognition that a single act could ripple outward, altering the trajectory of an entire family. They gathered around, voices low and trembling, absorbing the reality that they could breathe without calculation, that fear no longer dictated the next decision. The tension that had clung to their shoulders loosened, replaced by the fragile, shining certainty of hope realized. In that instant, gratitude became more than words. It became a bond, a shared understanding that kindness had manifested in a way that exceeded expectation. She, too, felt a release. The anxiety that had shadowed every brushstroke finally lifted, replaced with an energy that hinted at the possibility of life beyond survival. Do you feel that shift, the kind that changes how you see the world and your place in it? Moments like this are rare, but when they arrive, they illuminate not only the generosity of others, but the resilience within ourselves. That call didn't just pay bills, it restored dignity, reinforced trust in humanity, and allowed a family to hope without fear for the first time in months. It was justice, not in the courtroom sense, but in the deep emotional sense of balance restored. And in that balance, the entire household exhaled, knowing that the path forward had suddenly become brighter, fuller, and infinitely more possible.
Months passed, and the treatments that had once felt like insurmountable obstacles began to show results. She regained strength, her hair grew back, and each brushstroke became a declaration of resilience rather than a quiet plea for help. Can you imagine the sensation of reclaiming something so fundamental, your body, your voice, your creative expression, after a period where every day had been measured against uncertainty? What once felt fragile now carried the weight of triumph, proof that perseverance could coexist with vulnerability. Her work, once confined to a small folding table on the Strip, found a new stage. A local gallery offered her first professional show, an opportunity that validated not just her talent, but her courage. Walking into that space, seeing her pieces displayed with care and respect, she understood that recognition was no longer measured by survival alone, but by the impact her art could have on others. Have you noticed how accomplishment tastes sweeter when it follows struggle?
The confidence that had wavered during those long days of rejection now shone steadily, guiding her toward paths she had only dared imagine in fleeting dreams. In the years that followed, her name began to appear in galleries across the Southwest, each exhibition reinforcing that the trials she endured had not defined her limits, but expanded them. Her story became more than a personal journey. It became a testament to the way kindness and persistence can alter a life trajectory. From the fragile teenager clutching $1,000 stack of bills to a young artist celebrated for her vision, the arc completes itself, reminding us all that adversity can be transformed into legacy and that the moments we fear may ultimately become the moments that define us. Sometimes change arrives quietly, without fanfare, carried in the actions of someone who chooses to see another's need and respond. Can one gesture truly alter a life? In Sarah's case, it did. A simple decision to stop, look, and act transformed fear into hope, uncertainty into possibility, and struggle into opportunity. It reminds us that kindness is not always loud or public. Its power lies in its sincerity, in the choice to invest care where it is most needed. Have you paused lately to consider how your own actions, no matter how small, might ripple outward in ways you cannot yet see? This story is not just hers. It belongs to all of us who witness, who give, and who believe in the quiet strength of generosity. Share your reflections below, and let us celebrate the moments when humanity chooses compassion over indifference.